Well, good morning, at least on my side of the time zones. It's still morning. My name is Michael Valley. I'm an alcoholic. It's great to be here. And Glenn, thank you for the opportunity to come in and share a little bit about recovery and what God has done in my life. Feel very fortunate to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I left on Friday, going up to a conference in Bismarck, North Dakota. Deal called Rule 62 Rendezvous. Just some great folks up there, and came home and just felt miserable. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Yesterday, my wife was much smarter than I am. Lassoed me and threw me in the back of the car and got me to a doctor. And I just been battling a high fever and woke up. I would say just enough time to jump in the shower and clean up a little bit right before this meeting. I'm grateful that I feel well enough to be here, and got some rebounding to do, but we're going to be all right. So I appreciate the opportunity. I when I think of what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me, I really don't know how to describe it. I've been sober since August 27th of 1991. And I think in the first few months, or even maybe the first few years, you might have said I was happy that I was sober, and that's probably true. Still true today for sure. But it as sobriety alone gets to be a smaller and smaller portion of what I'm grateful for. And what do I mean by that? I certainly in no way, shape, or form diminish that great gift, not in the least. I just, my vantage point changes. I see the same things from new and different perspectives than I did before. I tend to grow through some pain. I tend to grow through my mistakes. I tend to grow through almost these periods where it seems dry. And then I sort of come out on the other end, and I have a little bit more of a fruitful take on what I just went through versus what I felt like I was going through in the middle of it. And there's a couple of portions in the 12 and 12 that I would like that I think states that, or really brings it home for me. On page 97, in the 12 and 12, the text says this. It says, "Those of us who have come to make regular use of prayer would no more do without it than we would refuse air, food, or sunshine. And for the same reason, when we refuse air, light, or food, the body suffers. And when we turn away from meditation and prayer, we likewise deprive our minds, our emotions, and our intuitions of vitally needed support. As the body can fail its purpose for lack of nourishment, so can the soul. We all need the light of God's reality, the nourishment of His strength, and the atmosphere of His grace. To an amazing extent, the facet of AA life confirms this ageless truth." And I would say to you that I really felt when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that my primary purpose was to not drink. Thanks to some really good sponsorship, certainly the process that's laid out in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, to practice. I had this thing that is randomly talked about, sometimes almost nonchalantly, but it's miraculous. It's this spiritual awakening. Something happened to me along the road, and I can't really explain it. I was a guy who was full of malice and full of frustration and full of angst, and certainly full of booze. But as the process of the steps got worked out, as I began to recognize that I actually had what that big book calls alcoholism, which is different than the definition I walked into AA with. The definition that I had of alcoholism when I walked into AA was simply this: chronic drunkenness. And I sat down in a cafe with a gentleman who eventually became my sponsor, and he asked me specifically, "Mike, what do you think alcoholism is?" And I told him that. It's when you're chronically drunk. And man, his facial expression changed. he kind of rubbed his forehead a little bit, and sighed a little bit. He said, Mike, I'm going to tell you something, and I really mean this, and I want you to hear me say it. Alcoholism and drunkenness have almost nothing to do with each other. After 32 years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I believe that man. It didn't take me long to believe him, but I've believed him since the beginning, and I think that's been paramount to my recovery. The idea that somehow separation from alcohol was going to fix the agonies of my soul that led me to chronic drunkenness in the first place is ridiculous. It sort of went like this, as I can see, like some big, vast timeline of my life. There was a crushing of my life in some fashion. There was this massive ego generation that had taken place. And I walked around the planet like everybody owed me something. Like I sort of was treated unfairly in the face of nothing but kindness, right? I had the whole perception of my life was off balance. And that sense of feeling broken and alone and afraid would lead me to booze to sort of satiate or anesthetize some of that pain. But I couldn't stop there. I couldn't stop there. I didn't know I had this allergy that Dr. Silkworth talks about. I didn't know I had what Bill describes in his story. I had no idea. I had no idea. And so I couldn't figure out why I drank to the levels I drank. And so I figured it must be a weak will or must be morally corrupt or something. And of course, I'm probably weak-willed and certainly have proven that I could be morally corrupt. That's not my point. My point is that I have this physical allergy that Bill talks about that's over and above and beyond those other things, right? In the doctor's opinion, it talks about just because we were, many of us thought we drank with maladjusted to life, right? Full flight from reality. Now, if it's any picture, the doctor's opinion says, any picture of the alcoholic that doesn't include a physical factor, we think it's incomplete. And so if you took booze away from me and thought that would be the answer, and I was simply left with the feelings and the perceptions of life and the brokenness of my soul, the holes in my spirit, the longing for something authentic that could never be fulfilled with the material things of life. If all you did was take alcohol away from me and didn't offer me an opportunity to actually eat and digest real solutions to these agonies of my heart, like forget it, I don't want your sobriety. If I had to go back to the way I lived sober prior to AA, and all AA did was take booze away from me, and the agony stayed, not sure I want what you're offering. But fortunately, that's not what you were offering, right? What you were offering, which I didn't know either, was a relationship with a God who can fix all of those parts of me that are anguished and fractured and alone and sense of separation. God can fix all of that if I'll allow him to. And therefore, taking booze away now becomes a blessing instead of a curse. I thought it was a bit of a curse early because having a couple of drinks was the only thing that made me feel okay. And there were several people that would just talk to me about like how great it'd be that, AA gets me sober. Well, yeah, for sure. But if it stopped at sobriety, I'd be a guy that would be in big trouble. If all AA offered me was not drinking, I would be in big trouble. And I'm glad that it doesn't stop there. I'm glad that Alcoholics Anonymous and its founders were wise enough to understand from these sources, and they're pulling from all these different sources, right? They pulled from religion, they pulled from psychiatry, they pulled from all of these different sort of schools of thought, right? Philosophy and so forth. And they determined that something else was wrong. Their own personal experience cried out that just not drinking isn't enough. And I'm so glad they were candid and honest about that. I'm so glad that they call us to deeper and bigger highs than simply not drinking. Now, not drinking is enormously important. I want to be clear there. It's enormously important. I can't get the rest of this if I don't get the beginning part, right? And in Alcoholics Anonymous, sobriety is the starting line. It's not the finishing. It's the starting line. I can't even run the race to the better things of life if I don't get sobriety. So I got to do whatever I got to do to get and maintain sobriety, and then do the work after it, and then see these magnificent results, see these things that come to me that are so far beyond what I am honestly due. So my sponsor was clear we had to do the work, and I didn't really know all that meant. I just trusted him for some reason, and we walked through the book. And the first thing that was clear was that I had this allergy to alcohol, that when I started drinking, I had an inability to control the amount I took. Couldn't stop that. So I'd get on my knees and I'd pray for it. And I never saw God show up and give that to me. What I did see is days on a calendar go by, and I didn't drink. I didn't see him. I saw the results of him. You know, I heard this a long time ago, and man, I hold on to this one. Someone said, well, how do you know God exists? You can't see him. And the response went something like this. Well, how do you know wind exists? You can't see that either. You can see the effects of the wind. You can see the leaves blow, right? You can see things roll down the street. You can feel it on yourself, right? You can feel your hair get pushed back in it, but you can't see it. And man, that is so true. When I came to the meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I could see the effects of God. Couldn't see him, but I could see him within the stories that you told. I could see him when he talked, when the divorced person talked about not hating their ex-spouse anymore. When the dad who ignored and put his children aside suddenly went to play catch with him in the backyard. When the regular member owed so much money they could barely breathe, suddenly gets out of debt. God didn't show up in physical form around me in that sense. What he did was he sort of showed himself through the life events of the people around me. And I began to think in step 2 that if God could do that for you, if God could restore you to sanity, maybe he could restore me to sanity. And that was really hopeful for me. And the reason is because I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with all of the defects that everybody else does, right? I wasn't less or more defective than anybody else. But one of the things that I handedly brought with me was pride. And C.S. Lewis says pride is the sin of comparison, right? So I look at you and I assess me. And I say, I'm better than you, I'm cuter than you, I'm smarter than you, I have more money than you, I'm more educated than you. Or I say, I'm uglier than you, I'm dumber than you. But it's always an assessment, and I'm always the plumb line. I'm always the thing that everything else should be assessed by, because that's how important I am. It's stupid. Whether I fall short of it or whether I rise above the plumb line, I'm always the plumb line. That's a problem. Because I believe Lewis when he says that. I think sin is the pride of comparison. And I would do that in AA. And, there were some people that I would hear their stories and I would think, well, why are you even here? I mean, you drank for 3 or 4 years, like get your act together and go home, right? Very arrogant. And then there were other people that I would hear, right? And I would think they were worse than me. They were worse than me, right? They served this amount of time in prison. Not me. I've never been to prison. They did this, they did that. I never did those things. Like, what's wrong with those? We'd have this conflict, right? But see, God used that. God used that to his advantage and to mine. He's willing to use whatever we bring him, even when what we bring him is broken, in my case. And so he took that pride and he said, Mike, sort of silently, Mike, if all of these people that are worse than you, in your own estimation, I have helped. I have gotten better. I have made whole. Like, why can't I do that for you? If I've been able to do it for others, why can't I do it for you? And he hadn't. See, I didn't really have a hard time when I came into AA thinking that there was a loving God that existed. I was pretty sure there was. I just wasn't sure he would do much for me, right? Like I believed he existed. I believed he would do good things for you. I just wasn't convinced he would do good things for me. Because if you had done some of the things that I did to his kids, to his children, to the other people walking around the planet, I, I don't know how a loving God could help someone who would hurt people like that. And so I knew he existed, but I just didn't think there was much he would do for me. And of course, all of these things are traps, right? They're just mental traps. But if given to the hand of God, he can work them out. He can use them. He can use all of those false acknowledgments, all of those lies that swim around my fishbowl. He can straighten them out and teach me some things that I need to learn, that I need to learn. And so I decided that maybe if God could help you, he could help me. Right? Maybe. That if you could be restored to sanity, maybe I could too. And suddenly I began to digest step 2. So he said this prayer in step 3. He said, I don't want you to think for a second, this is my sponsor, Joe. I don't want you to think for a second, Mike, that just because you've said this prayer, you've taken step 3. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, he grabbed his book and he flipped it over. Page 64, top of page 64 says, though our decision, meaning step 3, right? Though our decision was vital and crucial, it could have little permanent effect unless at once followed by a strenuous effort to face. And he told me that was steps 4 and 5. And to be rid of, he told me that was 6 through 12. The things in ourselves that have been blocking us. So our liquor was but a symptom. So we had to get down to causes and conditions. And when he said that, it made sense to me, right? Like I had made countless decisions in my life about all kinds of things and never followed through on any of them. And you know what? They never came to fruition. And what Joe was simply telling me is that no matter the desire, no matter how eloquently I say the 3rd step prayer, how passionately I say, what I do when I get off my knees after saying it is going to be the telltale sign as to whether I meant it while I was on my knees. And I think he's right in that. And so I grabbed a piece of paper and a pen that he handed me, and I started writing down my resentments and my fears and my sex conduct. And we went through this thing that he called the 4th step. And I was relatively new to that in terms of inventory. I had no idea what that was about, but I took this look and then I went to this guy that he pointed me to and I told him everything I wrote down. Excuse me, I apologize for that. And I got all this stuff down. We were in this thing called the 5th step for 6 hours. Told this guy everything I wrote down. And yeah, it's longer than some and shorter than others. It doesn't even matter. What does matter is that in that meeting, everything that I wrote down was shared. It doesn't even mean that my 4th step was complete because within weeks and days and weeks and months later, I found other things that I didn't see in my 4th step. You know, but that's not the point. The point is, at that time, I did the best I could. And I was candid and I wrote all this down and then I shared it with another person and that other guy invited God into that conversation. So when I finished that up, he basically told me to go home for an hour, take a look at page 75 in our big book. And I was to thank God from the bottom of my heart that I knew him better. And I was to look at those questions there, right? Are the stones properly in place? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? Right? In other words, I think what those questions really are asking me was, Mike, are you being sincere? Or are you being a con artist again? Right? Are you trying to manipulate this thing or are you actually and sincerely trying to do it? And I got to tell you, I was as stunned as anybody. I really didn't think that I had the ability to be this sincere, but I did, and I was. That doesn't mean I did it perfect by anyone's stretch of the word, but by anyone's definition, but I was trying. I was honestly trying. And man, I loved that. I mean, I can't tell you what a sense of of sort of respect that brought, that I was really trying. You know? And then in 6, 7, and 8, during that little hour there, I was to pray. I was to ask God for the willingness to let him take the things that I was unwilling to give him. I was to pray in opposition of myself. When I saw my reluctance to trust God, I was to pray for the trust that I was reluctant to have. When I found myself unwilling to go to God and ask him to change my heart because I was too afraid of who I might be if he did change those parts of me, I was to pray against myself and ask him that anyways. It was almost assuming that he knew better than me. Mike, assume that he knows better than you, right? And trust that. Trust it. And so I don't know if I trusted it, but I know this. I trusted it enough to practice it. Maybe I didn't buy it all the way at that point, but I kept practicing it as a principle, right? I kept practicing it almost without as much heart and faith as I needed to complete it, but I just kept doing it. And over time, I began to see that I did want the life that God had for me, that I did want to learn how to love people the right way, that I did want to respect women and be an honorable man with my money and revere my wife and raise my children and be an active participant in my family and sponsor people in AA, and that I really, with God's help, could do those things, and that having him in my life as an integral part was essential. And I began to awaken to the fact, not completely, but I just began to awaken to the fact that if I didn't get this right with him, I probably wasn't going to get it right with just about anybody else. It began to seem as I went out to the world to make amends in 8 and 9, that there was something that was missing in almost all my relationships, and that was God. And again, through sponsorship, through prayer, through reading books that our founders had encouraged their people to read, through trying to stay alert and alive to the spiritual side of life, I began to see that all relationships have 3 parts to it, right? Every one of them has 3 parts to it. Me and you and God. And that both of us bringing God into the friendship, into the relationship, whatever that, will only edify that relationship. But maybe you can't. Maybe you don't understand that. Maybe you're at a different spot. Just like I was at a different spot when I first came into AA and didn't realize that. My job was to bring him into it no matter what. No matter what. And then that way, at least one of us would be bringing God into this friendship. And then it would be better than if neither of us did. Then it would be better than if neither of us did. And so it would help, no matter how trivial it seemed, that if I could just keep bringing God into my friendships, into my relationships. And how did I do that? Well, again, step 11, 10 and 11 talk about this pretty consistently. As I'm cleaning up the past, I'm to be looking for, at least in step 10, 4 things: selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when these crop up, our book says, not if, but when, right? I'm to do 4 things. So I'm to look for 4 things in step 10, and then I'm supposed to do 4 things. I look for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when they crop up, I'm supposed to ask God to remove it immediately. I'm supposed to discuss it with another person. If I've harmed you, I'm supposed to make amends right away. And then the fourth one, which has been amazing, resolutely turn my thoughts to someone I can help. It turns out that when I look back at my life, I see these relational deficiencies that had gone on, these demands for pleasure, demands for happiness, demands that I only have positive emotions at every second, or it's not right and unfair. I mean, I'm crazy, right? Pure ego. And that what happens is that when I love you, I get the love that my heart longs for. If I wait for you to get everything right and then love me, and then when you're all right with all that you're doing and I feel the love you're giving me, now it's time for me to give that love back. Like I'm late to the party. It's not going to work. someone has to be the initiator. Someone has to be the person to lay down the arms first. Say, I'm not fighting about this. I'm not yelling. I'm going to be calm here. I'm going to be the one that brings God into this. Not self-righteously, not above, arrogantly above the other person, looking down on them because they haven't done that. No. I mean, just with a mutual respect that if this relationship is going to blossom and flourish, no matter what it is, that God has to be the center of it. So if that's not how it's going to be, I'm going to be in broken relationships forever. Why would I want to do that? After coming through the turmoil that I did while I was drinking, coming through the turmoil of those early days of recovery without God being an active participant in my relationships, and seeing how broken they were, seeing how people became something for me to use, seeing how I disrespected myself and lacked dignity for myself through those times. Like, why would I want to go back to that? It just doesn't make sense. So step 11 for me is really about three things. It's about receiving God's love and doing whatever I can to receive it, to be open, to let him come and love me. And I do that through AA, I do that through my church, I do that through just trying to be alert and awake. But whatever I get, I'm not supposed to keep it. Now, the second portion of this is that I'm supposed to give it to everybody else. I'm not supposed to keep any of it for myself. Rule 1 of life is receive God's love. Rule 2 is give every bit of it away. Rule 3 is chronically repeat rules 1 and 2 every day for the rest of my life. It's not much deeper than that. But if I can stay connected to him, and if I can bring him to my wife, I've probably fulfilled my obligations as a husband. If I can receive his love and bring it to my children, I've probably fulfilled the responsibilities of a dad. If I can receive him and bring him to my grandchildren, I've probably fulfilled the responsibilities of what it means to be a grandparent, or an AA sponsor, or a friend, or a coworker, or someone who serves as customers, or someone who has partnerships with vendors. I mean, like whatever it is, if my concerns center around virtue and not ego inflation and not pleasure, I'm probably fulfilling those responsibilities as best I can determine anyway. Not, I don't know, maybe if we chat again in a year from now, I'll have some different observations. But up to this point, I have to tell you that it seems pretty much that way for me. I want to walk away from people in whatever conversation we have, and whatever depth of connection we have, and however big or small the friendship is. I want to walk away knowing I didn't hurt them. I want to walk away knowing that maybe that I somehow contributed to that. Now, maybe that's an arrogant thing to say also. I hope not. I mean, I hope I'm saying that in the right spirit. I don't know, but I know that if there was a guy years ago, excuse me, his name was Brother Lawrence. He wrote a couple of little books. They're very thin. It's a great book called The Practice of the Presence of God. And Dr. Bob used to hand this out in droves to his people all the time. And The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence is just a very, very simple way of trying to stay in moment-to-moment communication with God. That's it. I mean, it's just that simple. And when I can stay there, and I'm not saying to you, I'm not implying to you that I can do that regularly without great effort, without, I mean, I can't do it perfect. I'm just telling you, this brain gets pulled to a million different directions in a second. I mean, I am squirrel. I mean, that is me. Okay. So I want to be honest about, but coming back and coming back and coming back to it. If I get pulled off of God for a second, just come home. Just come home. Mike, just come home. When I can stay with God, you're in much less danger of getting hurt. When I can stay with God, you're in much less danger of being used, of being ridiculed, of being belittled, of being just treated in a manner that is less than the dignity you deserve as a person. And what I've found over the years is that there's variations of that, right? Like sometimes it's that I just didn't hurt you. Okay, well, that's good. But that's like the smallest end of that. I mean, oh, I didn't hurt you. Like, wow, you're safe to live next to, right? That is not a great high standard for love, right? It would seem to me that like getting to know you and talking to you and hearing what you need and trying to provide what you need. I'm never going to be able to do it perfect, right? Especially if you're my wife, especially if you're my kids, especially if you're my grandkids. Like I think the responsibility sort of ripples out. The closer you are to me, the larger responsibility I have to make sure that I'm bringing God into our relationship so that not only just don't hurt you, right? But so much more than that. You know, it's interesting. On page 62 in our big book, Bill talks about how God is director, he's principal and father, and that we're his child and his agent. And then on the next page, he talks about how we have a new employer, capital E, right? We have a new employer, which obviously is referencing God there, right? Well, if my father is my employer, well, we all know what that means. I've joined the family business. So have you. We all joined the family business in step 3. What would be the job description of someone who applied to that company? What would be the requirements to hold a position within that firm? Well, what would the boss demand of us, being our dad or not? I suspect it would be inventory to iron out the kinks. I suspect it would be prayer and meditation to develop that sixth sense, to call us just past, I didn't hurt you, to I sacrificed so that you could have a better life. I suspect it would be the very same things he showed us when he reached down in the gutter and pulled us out of it. If God is indeed my Father, and I have indeed gotten a new employer, then I've joined the family business. What are the requirements of that work? Certainly, perhaps sponsorship at some level, and trying to be a balanced person on the outside world of AA. I just really feel like there's more here than not drinking. I just really feel like there's a lot more here than simply not harming others. And, to go back to that section of the 12 and 12, right? Right on page 98, where the last paragraph stopped, it says there is a direct linkage among self-examination, meditation, and prayer. Taken separately, these practices can bring much relief and benefit. Think about that. Taken separately. But when they are logically related and interwoven, the result is an unshakable foundation for life. An unshakable foundation for life. That's amazing. It says, now and then we may be granted a glimpse of that ultimate reality, which is God's kingdom. A glimpse of God's kingdom. That's what we get when we work 10, 11, and 12 on a daily basis. We get glimpses of God's kingdom. And that we will be comforted and assured that our own destiny in that realm, in God's kingdom, will be secure for so long as we try, however falteringly, to find and to do the will of our own Creator. To find and to do the will of our own Creator. I got to tell you, there's times I'm not sure what God's will is. I just can't tell you. It just seems confusing to me. It seems overwhelming to me. I don't know why there's rings around Saturn. I don't know why he invented something like male pattern baldness or double chins. I don't know why he did these things, but they're all in his will for some reason, right? And so sometimes it's difficult to see what that will is, but I think this, that at very least God's will has to be, Mike, the people that you bumped into today, did you love them with my love? Mike, the people that you spoke to today, did you listen to them with my ears? Mike, the people that you embraced today, did you hug them with my arms? I think those things are central to whatever his will might be. In other words, let's say I figured out the mosaic, right? Let's say I figured out all the little minutiae parts of what his will might be, but I didn't bring love to it. Well, who cares? Who cares about the rest of it? And so I think I'm closer if I try to bring God's love to these things that are my daily, regular activities in life, to figuring out the mosaic. If love is the engine, love is the motivation and the passion, and the central part of how I treat people. I think I'm closer with that than no love and trying to figure out the mosaic. Right? If I bring love to it, I'm at least that much closer. And what I found is that every person deserves respect. What I found is that women in AA should be treated with dignity and honor and be revered, as men should also. Right? That there's always something that I can bring to the table, even if it's simply the ability to listen to another person. No, I don't have to have the answers. I don't have the answers. I'm on this journey too. I'm trying to figure it out myself. But if I can simply, respectfully, kindly, lovingly point someone to him because he's their answer, I'm probably in a better spot than sputtering out a bunch of AA knowledge that I've acquired over the years, just repeating AA history and using it as some sort of battering ram to separate myself from other members who don't know that history. I got to tell you, my old sponsor, a gentleman named Keith Lewis, who passed away back in 2007, I loved this man. I loved this man deeply. He was an incredible human being. And Keith Lewis used to say, Mike, knowledge is the booby prize. Knowledge is the booby prize. You know, and Keith went out and he spoke probably 40, 45 times a year at different conferences. He was on the move. People wanted him around. And he began to develop dementia as a result from some ALS. And it was so ironic the way God called him home, because he lost his memory of much of that knowledge that he acquired over almost 40 years of sobriety, sharing it with other people, the books he read, the things he had. He lost a lot of that. But the one thing he didn't lose was his love for you. Keith used to tell me that every day he would get up and he would go over, and in the latter days of his life, he would repeat the same stories over and over and over as his dementia continued to excel. And he wouldn't even remember that he told you the same thing yesterday that he was about to tell you today. But he would repeat it over and over and over again. And he would say, I don't know if I told you this or not, but today I went over to the chapel that's by my house and I prayed for all the alcoholics who don't know God. And all the people who are using God as a replacement using alcohol as a replacement for God. So I really hope they work this program. Like, I really hope they find it. And I talked to him the next day and he'd be like, I don't know if I told you this or not. No. The other day I went over to it. It was so sweet. It was so powerful. And I would talk to his wife. And he's like, he sits in that chapel for hours. For hours. And he prays for all of the alcoholics who have yet to find recovery. Now that may not sound like a big deal. But what's interesting to me is in the latter days of his life, when he lost much of his cognitions, right? When he lost his ability to really say important things from a podium. He practiced it more when he lost that side of himself. He brought his heart to God and prayed for you. He brought his heart to God and he prayed for me. And I got to tell you, I will take the Keith at the end as before the Keith at the beginning. It was almost as if he was growing in this thing that we call the spiritual life in magnificent, magnificent ways when he wasn't trying to. It was like he finally got himself out of the way. And God could just love other people through him. God could just honor people through him. And he was one of the best examples of that 12th step. You know, this idea of getting a glimpse of God's kingdom. You know, in my experience, here's what I've learned, and then I'll shut up and pass it back to Glenn. Is that within God's kingdom, we do get these glimpses, just like the text said here a few minutes ago. But if we keep practicing, if we keep pursuing this love of God, if we keep trying to sort of actually and metaphorically be on our knees before him, let him be God and we not be God. As long as we can continue to take that sort of disposition, those glimpses grow. And those glimpses become glances and eventually a gaze. And eventually, more often, we get to see God at work. We get to see God's hand at work in the people around us. And maybe we can finally get to a spot where he can have all of us, not most of us, not a lot of us, but all of us. That's my prayer for me, and that's my prayer for you. I love you, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here this morning. And Glenn, thank you again, my brother, for the opportunity. Thank you very much. Have a great day, folks.
Thank you, Michael.